first of all, to add my very warm welcome to NRS and to the building that we have here. And as Chris said, it is a fantastic room. I use it quite a lot, and I speak here quite a lot. And every time I come, I am reminded of the wealth of what we have around us. And sometimes it feels quite Hogwartian, but actually I think there's something really quite nice about the fact that we're doing things with data and digital stuff in a room that has this sense of history. And as Chris says, where better to celebrate a birthday than in a room which has got the births of everybody in Scotland for the last 150 years, as well as, of course, deaths, marriages. And if you've ever lived here, even if you haven't been born, married, or died here, and you probably haven't died here yet, but you will. It's one of the things about being a Registrar General, and we'll talk a little bit about mortality, but one of the things that I always remember is that whatever else is certain in life, death is certainly there. How we die, when we die, what causes, all the rest of it is a moot matter for research, but ultimately it all ends with death for us all. So with that cheery note, it's a celebration today, and it's a celebration of progress and of life as well, because there's been a lot of good stuff coming out of the SLS. The SLS, I think, has been a trailblazer for data linkage in Scotland. It brings together data from the census and the vital events records, as well as from health and education, and that's been really, really good. It all started, as you all know, well know, back in 2007, and I guess a kind of reflection on what else was happening at around that time. So you may recall that Bulgaria and Romania joined the EU in that year. It was International Polar Year. Never let it be said that a research seminar wasn't a place to get a cute picture of cuddly bears into the presentation. Less cute, but also pretty significant, was the financial crash, sparked arguably by the collapse of BNP Paribas. It was the year in which this Earth-like extrasolar panel, which I think is pronounced Gliese 581c, was discovered. And it was a bank holiday, St Andrew's Day, for the first time. One of the first things that Mr Salmon did when he came to power in 2007. So that was the kind of backdrop against which the SLS, I think, was set up. And over that time, it's grown quite significantly. So it was launched in March 2007, and it had 9 projects by 6 months later. By the end of February 2009, it had 27 live projects, and some key health and educational data had been added into it as well. There's a little bit of a hiatus while people waited for the 2011 census data to become available, and by the end of 2014, 79 applications, and now I understand 105 applications, 53 active projects. So that's a significant growth factor in a relatively specialised area of research over that 10-year. So I think there is, even apart from anything else, that in itself is something to celebrate, as that data becomes more widely available and more widely used. But I guess for me, process is one thing, and inputs is good, but what about outputs? And even more importantly, perhaps, what about outcomes? And so I asked if we could pull together 10 things that we didn't know 10 years ago as a consequence of the SLS and its use and the projects associated with it. And we know stuff about the Scottish effect, about mortality and bereavement, about housing tenure, about social conditions, about health and education, that we didn't know 10 years ago. And that's a great thing to remember. I'm just going to whiz through some of those. I will not do justice to them, and those of you who have worked on these particular projects can nuance them appropriately later on. But from my point of view, I don't want to go into detail about them. I just want to give a sense of the breadth of what we might now know. And you might have your own top 10 things that you have derived from this, which may be different from this set. That's absolutely fine. But it gives a bit of a sense of the breadth of what we now know. So, for example, we know that the Scottish effect, that high mortality rates cannot be explained by adjusting for household level difference. And equally, that religious affiliation is not a factor in that. We know that excess mortality in Scotland is concentrated among low-skilled workers, and although mortality has improved in men and women in most occupational groups, some groups have experienced increased rates. We know that bereaved parents are between 2 and 4 times more likely to die or become widowed in the first 10 years after the experience of stillbirth or the death of their child than non-bereaved parents. We know things about housing. We know it's not beneficial to create pockets of owner occupation in predominantly socially rented neighbourhoods. We know that after 2001, owner-occupiers were getting older, social renters were getting younger. We know that men with cancer typically have smaller networks than women, and that some men who are separated or divorced lack such support, which can leave them more vulnerable to depression. We know that mortality is higher in its majority population, disabled people, males, those reported being raised as Roman Catholics or with no religion, whereas it's lower in Asians, females, and other religious groups. We know that the effect of air pollution exposure on birth outcomes such as newborn size may have been underestimated. And we know that to reduce inequalities in higher education access, it's as important to provide clear information and support in the curricular decisions in the crucial years of secondary school as to improve attainment of more socially disadvantaged people. So that is an interesting spread of things that we now know that we did not know 10 years ago, or maybe we thought we knew, but we didn't have the evidence to prove, which is not necessarily the same thing. So although I've called it 10 things we didn't know, I think it's probably 10 things we couldn't prove, or 10 things we didn't have the evidence for, or 10 things that we couldn't point to particular research that demonstrated. So I think the SLS is a fantastic example of the reuse of existing assets to learn more about the people of Scotland and to help improve outcomes. But actually, there's a question for me, an underlying question really, around how does this get translated into better outcomes for people? And research is great, and it is helpful, and it is a bedrock of what we need to do, but it does need to be translated into policy outcomes. And I guess there is still an open question for me about whether we do that well enough and whether we can do more about that. And as we think about the next 10 years, is that something that we should be thinking about? And you may have your own views on that. So I think it's important to remember that the SLS doesn't exist in a vacuum. It exists within what I think is quite an exciting time, actually, for data linkage in Scotland. I think there's an increasing understanding of the power of data linkage. There's an increasing commitment, increasing understanding on the part of policy people in understanding how this can help them and lead to better outcomes. And also, actually, a significant amount of investment that is available, and Chris has already paid tribute to the SRC, but other funders as well who are supporting data linkage work. And it fits within this broader arena, if you like, which is around Scotland's digital strategy, which has got commitments to data and to data linkage in it. There's a data vision for Scotland, which I think is quite powerful, could do with a bit of refreshing, but it's a good starting point. There's something there for us. There are data linkage capabilities, including through the Scottish Informatics Linkage Collaboration, which brings together a whole set of research bodies and others. And I think there is scope for these enhanced insights to be made available and to feed into better outcomes. But if that's going to happen, then it's not going to happen just by chance. It's going to require work by us and by others, and it's going to require collaboration. Because I think what is critical to making all of this work and to delivering on this agenda is definitely that better collaboration between us all. So it's great, therefore, that you're all together here, and I'm delighted to be here with you and to hear a bit more about some of the work that some of you have been doing. As we look forward and think about what might come next, nonetheless, as Chris has rightly said, it's a moment just to pause, to celebrate what has happened, what has been achieved already. And that's really what today's about. And Chris had candles, I've got balloons. I think overall we should simply recognise that whether you're a candle person or a balloons person, it is still a cause to celebrate. And I'm glad to be here and to be able to recognise formally and collaboratively, if you like, the success that the SLS has had over the last 10 years, and look forward to much more over the coming years. So enjoy your afternoon. Thank you very much, and I look forward to hearing a bit more from others shortly. Thank you very much.